Hey listeners, it's me again. We didn't get a chance to include this in our regular introduction, so I'm doing it now. In case you didn't know, this episode is part of a larger event being put on by Real Archaeology. We're proud to join a collective of online creators whose goal is to collaborate in creating, promoting, and sharing entertaining and educational media with the wider public on the wonders of our shared history. From October 25th to the 27th, Real Archaeology content creators will be releasing a myriad of archaeology-related content across multiple platforms, including YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. If you want to learn more, check out the webpage at real-archaeology.com or search #RealArchaeology on your favorite platforms to find and engage with all the new content. Finally, stay tuned to Season 5 of Movies We Dig, where we plan to have a few of these creators come on the show to talk about archaeology on film. Now, back to the show.
Hello, and welcome to Movies We Dig, the podcast about film, antiquity, and everything in between. I'm Christy Vogler.
I'm Elijah Fleming.
And I'm Colin McCormick.
And today we continue to explore archaeologists and pop media by examining the 2010s reboot of Lara Croft, specifically the 2013 game and the 2018 film that was supposedly based on that game. The film is an American and British co-production, which stars Alicia Vikander.
Alicia Vikander, right? That's how she says it.
Okay. As Lara Croft, who embarks on a perilous journey to her father's last known destination, which is his grave, apparently, but not. Who knows? And she hopes to solve a mystery of his disappearance, starring as supporting actors Dominic West, Walton Goggins, Daniel Wu, and Kristen Scott Thomas. And to help us discuss this archaeologist turned Tomb Raider, we are joined by a new special guest, Julie Levy. Julie holds a BA, a bachelor's in classical history and East Asian studies from Wesleyan University, an MA in classical philology from Tufts University, and a second MA in classical philology from Boston University. And they are currently the managing director at the Save Ancient Studies Alliance. So welcome and thank you for joining us today, Julie.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yes, we put out a special call to all of the Lara Croft fans in the world, and Julie answered that call, so we're very happy to have her today. So, as usual, we always like to throw our most important question to our guests first. Julie, if you could tell us a little bit, what is your experience with the Lara Croft franchise? And overall, did you dig this reboot of Lara Croft?
So, interestingly enough, I was never a big Tomb Raider player. I did see a whole big chunk of the first game back when it came out in, 96?
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely have seen a lot of Tomb Raider media over the years, been immersed in the memes. One thing about my background is at this point, a lot of what I do for for my job is archaeo gaming of some kind, which is to say any crossover of gaming and archaeology. But specifically, I do a lot of board and video game archaeology, looking for ancient studies content and talking about it. And so Tomb Raider has been on my radar for quite some time.
Your radar, if you would. Sorry.
I will, in fact. So my actual real experience with Lara Croft, outside of doing it for work, is I saw the original Angelina Jolie movies.
Mm-hmm.
I knew about the series. I had seen some gameplay. I had never really played them myself. The movies, the first movie especially, was just silly. They're so silly and fun and ridiculous. And I can't tell you that I remember almost anything about the plot of those two movies. I don't think I saw them in theaters, but I saw them shortly after.
Mm-hmm.
And they're so fluffy.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, we unpacked those a bit already, and I grew up with those were my Indiana Jones growing up. So
Christy's beating the drum as the sole Lara Croft stan.
I love her so much.
I mean, I totally get it, because growing up loving, the idea of ancient civilizations and this sort of mystical mystery stuff out in the atmosphere that, tends to surround when we think about the past. And plus we've got all of these male action heroes like Indiana Jones getting this big airtime, and the rest of us are just going, when can I do that? And Lara Croft was one of the answers.
Yeah.
Like her and Joanna Dark, maybe.
Oh, that's a pull.
I was just thinking about it earlier today. Like female action stars from 90s video games.
I would say I haven't heard that name in wow.
Yeah, not as beloved as Lara Croft, but like it really is a very similar concept to an Indiana Jones, right? Like she's more of an adventurer than she is an archaeologist. More in it for the supernatural than the realism. More in it for the action than the education. But it's fun, right? And like as much as I at this point in my career I'm just tired of Atlantis. You know, like no, it's a thing Plato made up. In context, he made it up. It's not real. Stop looking for it.
Has Lara Croft gone to Atlantis? Actually, in all of the dozens of games, I imagine she must have at some point.
But the first movie was an Atlantis plot. Ancient advanced civilization trying to resurrect the dead continent and all that.
Yeah, we had talked about how like it was really interesting that Lara Croft like did dip into some of the mysticism and some of the ancient civ, advanced civ stuff that was problematic, but it seemed unaware of it at the same time. Like it was kind of pulling from like what was already out there without realizing like the deeper connotations of it.
Like the movie I think about all the time when I think about advanced civ and Atlantis mythology is Alien versus Predator, which has that exact same conceit where they live in Antarctica. And I might have like in my head, I think I fever dream Mandela affected us talking about Alien versus Predator, but maybe we should. But that's for a later date.
Because I love that movie.
Have you talked about Stargate? Because bring me back to Stargate.
It's on the list.
We're coming down the pipe.
I love Stargate. Problematic fave, but I love it so much.
A movie about discovering a new civilization and then giving them guns and cigarettes. But I'm being completely serious. That happens in the movie, but
that's like blending a little bit with cultural anthropology almost, because like that's kind of a little bit of ethnographic work happening there.
So yeah, when you asked me to talk about the newer Tomb Raider, I actually didn't know much about it. I knew it had been darker and grittier, but I actually started playing it the day that we talked. I just finished it, actually.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Nice.
So that was very different, extremely different, totally different vibe. Like in the early games, it's all cartoons and polygon boobs, and you know, it's very, you're distanced from whatever violence is going on, and you're mostly like, if you're killing things, you're mostly killing animals. It's not like human on human. But this, like, she's basically a one-woman army taking out, it must have been hundreds of guys.
Yeah. By the end,
it
was
I think that ridiculous.
That final stage, you probably mow down like a small army of goons.
I'm pretty sure there's an achievement based on like the number of people you end up taking out too.
That sounds right.
That's okay.
It's a lot.
To me, the gameplay it most closely reminded me of was like Arkham Asylum, in terms of like the premise of like moving from location to location, kind of sneaking around, taking out guys. You know, you want to try to take them out stealthily, but sometimes you have to just like duke it out with whatever weapon is on hand. And
Arkham Asylum plus guns and arrows,
basically. And a good old hiker's pickaxe thing too. Just
and a grenade launcher occasionally.
Whenever the occasion calls for it.
Why not? I guess.
Very handy to have. Yeah, very handy to have on an archaeological dig. It's
and so that was definitely a turn. And then I watched the movie, and it was so different as well. Like very, very little direct violence, but also specifically eliminating the supernatural from the plot.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which I thought was an interesting turn.
It really was, yeah. I forgot that it happened until I rewatched it. So
So for our legal team, well, by the way, never mind. But for our legal team, we need to just have on record: do you dig? Like, what's the dig status of Tomb Raider 2018?
So, do I dig Tomb Raider 2018? There are good things about it. I dig that they actually did veer away from the supernatural plot. Actually, I liked the setup that they set up you to think that it's a supernatural thing going on, and then they pull that rug. And I think that's a great tactic that should be used more. The old Scooby-Doo, let's do it. It was just the old man with a lot of greed all along is usually the answer in real life, so why isn't it in movies?
Yeah.
I don't so much dig the writing was very slapdash. The acting was fine. It was a little bit scenery chewy, but that's, that doesn't bother me. I'm a Tim Curry fan. Chew on the scenery, do it. But like it didn't come together. Like they were trying too hard to do Indiana Jones, but also, Hunger Games, but also whatever else was popular at the time. There were just so many things they were trying to do that it came off a mess.
Yeah, it also seemed like simplified from what the games are in a lot of ways.
And they took out her backstory as an archaeologist, which made me upset. They took out her backstory as having a girlfriend, which made me upset. Because where is Sam? I miss Sam.
Yeah.
Who's also
they took out like her entire ring of friends.
Her entire friends group. She wasn't there alone.
This was like her PhD project.
They also stopped. They didn't use the proper myth of Himiko, which the game actually does a very good job of. So oddly enough, so mostly in my work these days, I'm usually working on, ancient Greece and Rome and some forays into ancient India or ancient Egypt as it comes up. That's more my specialty. That's what my master's and my not quite PhD are in. But actually, this came back to my East Asian Studies degree because I did actually study specifically Japan, and I lived there for a while. And when we started in the game with the Himiko myth, I was like, wait, I've heard this story before. This is an actual Japanese story from the Yayoi period, like right around what we term 100 BCE to 100 CE. So right in there, like this is an actual story that we have in our encyclopedias and everything. It's a part of Japanese history / myth. And I love that they started from something real.
Yeah, I wondered because like I'm familiar with some of the like other like Izanami. I knew was an actual death goddess, and Amaterasu like being trapped in a cave, sort of thing. So like it felt familiar, but I hadn't heard of Himiko before the game itself. So I'm glad we have someone who specializes in that because I had no idea.
I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I had heard of it before, and I have enough Japanese to have understood what the Storm Guard were yelling most of the time, which got very funny, actually. one of the kills, one of the kill statements that they make is, "Huh, she's cute."
No.
That was great. I burst out laughing, and my partner's like, "I thought you were playing that really violent game." I'm like, "Yeah, I just died."
So someone was having fun with it.
Yeah. I'm not going to say that they got all the archaeology right, but I did love that the game actually tried.
Yeah. So let's. Everyone knows I love Lara Croft, but I want to hear from Colin and Elijah. What did you guys think of this rebooted version of her?
Yeah, I am like, the usual stick in the mud for most things. And I am not a gamer at all. So I'm very terrible sort of making judgments about any of those things. I've never played any Lara Croft game. However, I rewatched the 2018 movie and I liked it a lot better than I did the first time. I wouldn't go so far as to say I like completely dig this movie, but I was surprised at like, oh yeah, that's okay, cool. And I agree with Julie. I really appreciate the ending. And I think that it was actually really fun to have that build up and certainly the expectation of this being a Tomb Raider movie that, yeah, it very well probably is going to be something supernatural. And then to be not at all.
Yeah.
And it reminded me a little bit of the end of Lost City, when they kind of twist like all of this, historic, I'm making quotes, air quotes here, historic like information we have about this, depicts this woman as a monster and they have to imprison her and they dragged her there. But once you're there, the story kind of flips and they're like, she actually took herself, and it was a much more, I almost want to say, like a feminist view of,
Mhm.
women see different things in archaeology sometimes. And so I did actually enjoy that, and I was surprised. I forgot Walter Goggins was in this, and I was delighted to see his terrifying face. So
How about you, Colin?
So I just, while we were talking, I was curious because I just opened up my Steam to check when, because I did play this game more or less at that. So I played this game back on October 7th, 2015 was the last time I was recorded playing. So it's been a few years, but I did play the rebooted game when it came out. I remember liking it generally. I had to refresh myself what the plot was. And then I watched this movie, or I rewatched this movie last night, and I saw it kind of randomly a few years ago. And genuinely, the only thing I remembered about this movie after watching it was that it opened with a extended fixie bike chase scene,
yeah.
which prodded or griped about the Angelina Jolie movie as being kind of so of its very particular slice in time of like the music choices and the stylings, and how you could clearly tell like this came out exactly in the early 2000s. And to me, that fixie bike scene was like, this could have only come out in the year 2018. The fact that they would think it would be cool to have an extended thing and she's like a favor bike rider and that. Generally, I don't dig this movie. I find it it is, you can kind of feel that it is a reboot of a reboot of a reboot of a reboot. And it has a very kind of down the middle, like it feels like an algorithm wrote this film
Mhm.
of like all of the plot points. Like it is functional. Like I think I prefer it to the Angelina Jolie movie in that it is a movie with a beginning, middle, and end, and like plot points that lead from A to B, but it is just joyless and a real kind of slog for me of everything, like where I just feel like I'm watching, like they go to the temple and I'm watching the last scene from the Last Crusade when they go in and then the guys are getting killed off by the traps.
Exactly.
And when they have a color puzzle, whatever that is, they're right. All of the sort of steps, or like the shipwreck. I'm like, I feel like I'm watching the Peter Jackson King Kong movie. Like every single part of it just reminded me of a movie I liked better. And altogether, it sort of lost me. That I found the game much more interesting in the way it dealt with the Himiko myth and the nature and the supernatural element of it all, which is kind of part and parcel. And also when I forgot completely as I rewatched it last night about the twist about that it's not supernatural at all. It's a completely sort of rational, logical explanation. I completely forgot about that. But out loud, I went, well, they just took that from Uncharted, where that is exactly the plot point in the first Uncharted game, that the thing they're looking for is actually, spoilers, a disease vector that the evil corporation wants to get access to because they can make bioweapons out of or whatever.
It's a typhoid berry story at the end, right?
Yes. Yeah. Himiko is not a powerful storm wizard, right? Where in the game, it's like, in the game, you're on like the Lost Island, where like there's a part where like a plane comes and you're like, great, we're going to be rescued. And then like a magical storm comes out of nowhere and destroys the plane.
Yeah.
Multiple times.
Yeah. And there's like ogre zombie samurai walking around killing people. Like there's very clearly like, paranormal things happening. Yeah. And just like the thing, like the way this movie was lit was just felt very like flat and boring. And it just felt like a movie that a computer made and then somebody made it.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I don't really dig this movie.
It did make me kind of appreciate the like almost camp of Angelina Jolie, and just like how that was, just kind of all like followed the almost cartoony-ness of the first game, to my understanding. Again, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't seem to take themselves too seriously. And I feel like the 2018 version tried to take itself really seriously.
Yeah. It felt like it was trying to be Batman Begins or something.
It was trying to be too many things at once. So like you said, it kept making homages to this other movie you liked. And I just wanted it to be its own thing. Like, I don't think that the plot was bad. It just didn't ever visually or tonally mesh.
Yeah.
Like, oh, and now we've got an Indiana Jones trap rolling at us. Okay. Like it's not compelling in and of itself.
And the logic, it was meant to keep something in instead of people, or like keep things in, and or like no, it was keeping things from leaving instead of like letting people get in. It's like, no, I'm pretty sure the problem is people getting in and then taking the thing out.
But it's also just, how could you tell that from a spike trap that just a spike shoots out of the ground and you say this is designed to keep people in versus out? And I'm like, it feels like it's just designed to kill people no matter which way they're going. But anyways, the thing, like, it was odd that, like, I found it so odd. I mentioned the lighting, that like so much of this movie takes place in like bright daylight.
Yeah.
I know they filmed it in South Africa, but it really just felt like they filmed it in California somewhere. But
yeah, that could have been anywhere.
I was like, did they film this in like their backyard to save money? Like, what's going on? But the game, like the thing about that 2013 game, again, is sort of really of its time, but that it was like very, very violent and gritty in a way that, like, the first couple parts of the game, it's like a survival game where literally it's like smash X to like pull the spike out of your abdomen and like, escape from the trap before this guy strangles you and then strangle him back. And it's just like really visceral. And there's the one part of the game I really remember that's kind of referenced in the movie is there's a part where you fall into, Julie, you just played it recently, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. You fall into a river and you have to like slalom down the river and there's all these spikes, and every time you die in that game, you like watch yourself get like violently killed.
Oh, it's
and I watched
so violent. It's so intense. I watched my throat get ripped out by wolves in like 8 different ways, and that was just when I was fighting the wolves at the beginning.
Yeah, I want that particular part where you like fall into the river. I watched my face like get impaled on a spike maybe a dozen times in a row.
So Colin, okay, so I will say I dig the game. I thought the game was a really fun reboot of Lara Croft, and I am not a gamer either, like Lige. So we all know what I do is I go to Andy and be like, babe, play this game for me, please. And this came because I knew it was coming out in 2013. I was super excited, and we had just started dating. So I forced that man to impale himself on a spike over and over and over again so I could see what happened to Lara Croft when she got past the spike.
True love.
True love.
Oh, man.
Adorable.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that I really liked about it, because the reboot was this idea, the original games, you had Lara Croft fully formed, right? Like the confident Angelina Jolie Lara Croft, who knows like what she's doing and kicking ass the whole time. And this one was very much about like Lara Croft is a recently graduated archaeology student who's going to pursue her PhD research with a bunch of friends. And then shit hits the fan and she has to kill someone for the first time. And the game kind of really deals like with grappling with those sorts of decisions she has to start to make to survive, to then get to the point at the end where you're using the dual pistols and you're the full Lara Croft. And I think that's one element that I kind of didn't like about the film. It was kind of almost trying it, but like they still were trying really hard to put her through as much pain as possible without straight up killing her like you can kill her in the video game. But you didn't have those slower, quieter moments of her like really having to struggle with the decisions she's making in order to survive, because it's an action movie.
She had a totally different personality and backstory in the movie than she did in the game, and I like the game one a lot better, not just because it was more relatable as a classics grad student who has had advisors who would totally sell me out to a madman. Yeah, that was real relatable. I knew from the first cutscene he was in that he was going to do something like that because I know that guy. Anyway, but like I really like that she starts out like, yeah, she has this interesting history with her father, which has been there through most of the games, of like her father having this weird mystical bent in archaeology and having gone missing or died, and like she's inheriting this thing and she's not certain about it. But in this game, we so rarely get to see a primary character who's a scholar, let alone a graduate student, let alone a graduate student who is not in the most privileged position.
Yes. Yep.
Like, not that she's not privileged. Obviously, she's white and wealthy and has this background with her father and stuff. But like, her advisor is kind of blowing her off because she's just a woman and a grad student, and he's the one who's going to get the credit for all her work, right? So that felt really real and empowering to me in a way that, daredevil, rebel, risk taker, bike rider, just like, okay, who is that?
Yeah.
Well, the answer is it's people from other movies. It's the
Yeah.
first couple of scenes in the J.J. Abrams Star Trek where Kirk is a kind of layabout wild
Yes.
child that needs to get
Yep.
sit down into joining the Navy, or it's
Mhm.
when Bruce Wayne. I mean, I keep Batman Begins. I really think is like the kind of most
Yes.
obvious parallel where
Yes.
it's like Bruce Wayne is kind of out there futzing around, ignoring his wealth at home so he can go like fight prisoners in China or whatever it is he's doing. And like Laura Croft is doing that. She's just kind of like, but again, it feels insincere because it's like, this isn't
It's a
an
pastiche.
original.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it, right? It's a mosaic person, not a
Yeah.
person.
Well, and the thing that I think we're just going to start having to delve in between the game, what the game was doing with the story versus what the movie did with the story. And we've already talked about the ending, which might have been the only good change. Like, I like that change, and that was totally fine. I liked that approach. But like, one thing is, she does find her dad on the island and he's alive. And as a
And
result,
he's terrible.
he's
Well,
terrible.
can we talk about Dominic? Can we talk about Dominic West for a second? Because like,
Sure.
I got thoughts. Like, I think he's a very terrific actor, but I have a big mental block when it comes to Dominic West. About there's something about his face and mannerisms that just reads creep to me. And he's like excellent when he's like someone like McNulty in The Wire, where he's got a little bit of a hard edge or a harder edge to him, or a bit of skeeviness or anything like that. And then seeing him being this like kind of pure wholesome father figure, I like just was like, what's going on? Like, this is a weird choice. Yeah, like he's going for Thomas Wayne, where I just feel like there were like allegations swirling around about, like, every time I see him on film, I'm like, this is a guy where their allegations are swirling. But
Well, considering he has a hidden room of stolen antiquities and owns the corporation that is trying to unleash a bioweapon, I think you are correct in that assessment.
Yeah, there is that.
but he's like a good dad too, is the part that I can't, like, I don't know.
Well, is he?
Yeah, he kind of abandons his
I think the
12-year-old
movie is
child.
trying to tell us he's a good dad.
Yeah,
right?
I think the movie's trying to tell us he's
Yeah.
a good dad, but it doesn't. It tells us, it doesn't show us.
Correct.
Yeah.
It only shows him leaving and then him like badgering his daughter when she tries to do stuff.
Right. I was just gonna add, it's like, and the problem I had with dad being there, and then like also removing the fact that like Laura is a scholar. Like, she straight up says in this movie, I didn't go to university. Like,
Yeah.
they just give this insinuation that she can solve some puzzles and quote Hamlet. So like, you get the sense of, and I think that's what the bike thing is supposed to be like. She's clever like a fox, but not scholarly, which is something we all really like about Lara Croft.
Yeah.
And also by the sort of the end of the movie, Dominic, when he comes back into the movie, I'm just going to call him Dominic West because I genuinely don't remember what his character's name is.
Mr. Croft.
Richard
Who knows
Croft.
that?
Richard Croft. Yeah, he kind of like, because like, again, a trope that I don't like is where you have a journal from the prior archaeologist who's already solved the whole thing, which again I believe is in at least one Indiana Jones movie, if not more. Definitely in Crystal Skull. And he's kind of solved it all already. Like, he's the one who's out. Like, the only thing that Laura kind of figures out is the color puzzle, basically, right?
Yeah.
Which is, and
Technically?
Well, she figures out the gate puzzle too, but that's based off another puzzle that I'm presuming her dad made.
That was the thing, the cylinder thing, right? That she was playing with.
Right. So like, she did solve it herself, but it wasn't like she was the first to solve it. It wasn't like this was something that was unique to her, or even like a proven skill set other than, oh, dad used to give me this particular kind of puzzle all the time. We had them all over the house. It's like, okay, why?
I also, what is like, I also was, it was just, I guess it's just a combination lock, right? Like, what part of my confusion is like, I didn't understand how the
I'm
puzzle
not
worked.
super familiar with that kind of puzzle. I have seen them before, but I think the idea is that you have to, it's like a 3D, like you have to line up the correct lines, because you saw that some of the puzzles had lines across them, and then the gate puzzle in particular had a lot of kanji, a lot of the more elaborate glyphs that you use in Japanese. And I wasn't particularly sure, because they didn't really focus in on it all that much, what she was doing with them, but it was essentially a combination log.
Yeah.
And you have these visual hints to help you untangle it. And Japan is actually very known for its logic puzzles. What's the first logic puzzle you think of? Oh, it's Sudoku, right? That's a Japanese puzzle. And there are like 10 more that you've probably seen at some point or other as you're doing like the crossword. It's like, oh, what's that? It's probably another Japanese style puzzle. Like, they're very common, and they're very common there. They do a lot of visual puzzles too. And so, like, it's not weird that this is an aspect of what they're doing with the Japanese mythology, to have these kind of logic puzzles, visual puzzles, but they don't really go into it enough in the movie to make it feel like anything other than a plot convenience.
Yeah, it's like the equivalent of like, there's like a computer, there's a firewall in a technical problem, and then the hacker character just kind of like clacks the keyboards for 5 minutes and then says, I'm in. Like, we don't understand. Like, this is like, I think, a problem with like a thing in the language of film, to compare it to, again, like a movie that this movie.
Yeah, this is reversing the polarity.
Yeah, where like in the Last Crusade, you get the sort of the puzzles in that movie. You get the sort of clues ahead of time, and then you see the puzzles, and then the character, like the audience, like you might be one step ahead, maybe not, but then the character solves it, and you understand how the sort of solution is working. And even in like video games, like I've been playing a lot of Zelda lately, where those games are really good about like, they kind of teach you how the puzzle works, and then you can go solve the puzzle. And so you learn the sort of rules and the logic, and then you can enact the puzzle. And then I think this is just kind of like a case of hand waving in filmmaking, that like these kind of shortcuts ultimately make for a poor film, where the film's just like, it's a complicated puzzle and only Laura can solve it.
And that's actually one of the things that I found really interesting about the movie is when it did choose to make homage to the gameplay. Because in the game, they very much use that traditional tried and true setup of, they give you an ability, they give you a little bit of like, here's the technical aspect of how to use it, and then they let you use it a couple of times without anybody shooting at you, so you can get used to it before you have to do it with people shooting at you. And in the movie, they don't really do that. They don't bother with that, which is, to me, the most fun aspect of the game, is learning to solve the navigation puzzles with the tools that they give you.
Yeah.
And a little bit of Metroidvania, where you can go new places now that you have this new ability, something like that.
Yeah.
But what they do instead is they take this interesting piece of visual language from the game. So in the game, if there's like something that you can climb or hang from, it's sort of painted white. And not like a bright white, but like a dirty white, so that you can be like, oh, I can hang off that, but not that one, because that's not white. So like, that's just a visual cue in the game. It's not very realistic, but it's helpful. And in the movie, they do this with like, there's that scene where they have to cross the chasm, right? Yeah. The lip of the chasm is white in the same way as it is in the game. And so as soon as they got there the first time, like when they were going inward, I'm like, well, this is going to crumble, and she's going to have to jump and cling off the edge. And they did, in fact, do that. What do you know? 2 scenes later, that's what happens. So like, they didn't take the fun part of the gameplay that they could have worked with. They took the like weird technical thing.
Yeah, like you get visual references to like some of the levels, like the river and like the plane.
Oh
and
yeah,
the boat,
her falling
like
on the
which are which are like, if you play the game, you like watch those, like, those are the quick time events. Where do I push the right button at the right exact
Yeah.
moment so I
Oh my
don't die horribly?
But it felt like I kind of felt like it felt like watching somebody play the game, but like,
Uh-huh.
and they're at like a pretty advanced level. So you're just like watching someone go through the motions sort of seamlessly, which is like when you're not doing it yourself, when you're not seeing the process of like it being figured out, you're like, well, this is boring, right? Some games are kind of boring to watch other people play. But
I didn't think that the plane sequence was terrible.
I could have
It
done
felt like
away
a
with
nice
it.
homage, but like it could have been better.
Yeah.
I also kept expecting the serious gore of the video game to show up, and it really never does. Like in the video game, there are multiple times where you're just like dropped into a literal river of blood and bones,
yeah.
or you're in a forest of desiccated bodies that have been strung up and ritually sacrificed.
Great.
Was this movie PG-13?
That's what I'm trying to think of. It is
Surely.
interesting to think about audience
Nobody swears,
difference.
right?
It might well have been.
Yeah, because it feels like this is an easy solution, and I
I know,
have
it's
the
like, now we're
Wikipedia
gonna
right up.
because that's a really good point of like, Lara Croft as a marketable name, because as in both video game franchises, because we talked about, like, historically, like, Lara Croft was an intentional attempt to make a female badass protagonist for people to play and not have it be just like a blonde bimbo was literally like a phrase used for like what they had seen in fighting games and stuff, because they were surprised to see that teenage boys would play female characters in fighting games, but like they were always like
And
really
also
bad
some
stereotypes.
girls would actually buy action games. What do you know?
That was an afterthought. It was an afterthought. They're like, oh, our
I'm
numbers
well
went up
aware.
when we did that. So
Actually, in the history of video game marketing, they deliberately
conscious
split
decision.
and gendered the games so that they could target specific markets, and then they forgot that they had done that basically, and figured that they didn't need to sell to girls because girls don't care. And it's like, yeah, good job.
Like the Atari was originally marketed as like a family thing. Like all the ads for like the Atari, or it's like played in the living room with the whole family. And then I think it's like in the 80s and 90s, you start seeing like deliberately targeted towards boys ads.
And
Some of them
specifically in the
are
US too.
yeah.
Like in Japan, instead of the NES, you have the Famicom, right? It's deliberately the family computer. That's what Famicom stands for, right? So like you still have this very family oriented marketing in Japan, but in the US, they start really like zooming in on like boys getting excited over violence and gross things, and
like watching, if you go and look at ads or watch TV ads for like the N64 and the PlayStation 3, some of them are like, how is this allowed? This is like this is like pushing into like a skeeviness of like these kids need to be put on a watch list. But
well, and that's why the audience idea is interesting if we switch it to like the age group being targeted, because you're right, the movie seems like it would be PG-13. I wouldn't say it would be rated R by any means, but
yeah, I don't think there's anything in there that would force it to be R. And PG-13 movies, like a lot of movie studios will aim for that if they can, because that just hits so much of a wider audience.
Yeah, it's more potential.
It is PG-13. I just looked it up.
Which the game is a hard R.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah. M for mature.
The game, which was assuredly played by teenagers,
yes,
very much rated R. Like that was more violence than I needed for any reason. And I'm not a particularly fighty person in games. That's not my favorite thing to do, but like it's pretty hard to squick me out. But falling into the literal river of blood and bones was a bit much. Like I remember I fell into the river and I just go, who enjoys this? Who is this for?
I'm trying to like map it also now into like the art video games, like going through, we talk about movies kind of going through these like cycles of like, we want it to be violent and dark and gritty, and video games are doing like very much the same thing. And like,
very much the same thing.
There's you get like your God of War. Sometimes it's super cartoony. Sometimes it's incredibly like down, like Last of Us is a game that has that, when you get killed by one of those zombies in Last of Us, it's like, this feels too real.
Right. Well, I think it's so interesting, Christy, that you compared it to Arkham Asylum. And like that, like I've seen that game played. Again, I haven't played it, but that really surprises me because that is not what I would have thought to compare it to.
It's true though, like if you play Arkham Asylum, the gameplay is very similar, but I would say that the violence still doesn't hit nearly as hard because
No.
it's just not gory. It like
Yeah.
you're punching people in the face. Yeah, you're stealthing around and like hanging men from gargoyles and stuff. But it's still very clean in a way that Tomb Raider just isn't.
Yeah.
And you know, since we're talking about like what it was going on in video games, and I was just looking around, and we have a God of War that comes out at this time, Aliens, Colonial Marines, we have Arkham Origins, Devil May Cry, you know, Saints Row. Like,
When
so
is
this
Red
is
Dead? When does
yeah.
that hit the scene?
Which one?
Red Dead Redemption.
That's a couple years after
That's
this.
later.
I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's going to be like
16, 17?
That's going to be 2018. So same year as the movie.
Okay.
But yeah, like movies were very much video games were very much going through a grimdark phase. And
When's Bloodborne, right? Is that right around then, or is that after?
I think that was a bit later too, but not much.
Is that in part be like you're trying to draw in a younger audience but maintain the original audience of the, you know, people playing in the 90s who might be in their like late 30s, 40s now?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the thing with gritty reboots is people are like, "Oh, I loved this thing," but then you go back and it's kind of janky and cartoony and the sexy lady is made of Legos. And so we want a realistic game with fabric that tears and blood that flows and dirt and grime and emotions. And then they take it too far and they have her get stabbed with a piece of rebar or like a spine or something right at the beginning,
rusty metal
that just like goes all the way through her torso as the first thing that happens to her. And it's like, yeah, she's dead. I'm sorry, she's just dead. Gut wounds are serious business, and especially with a rusty spike. Like, there's no way she does the rest of this action game after that.
Nope. Fun fact though, archaeologists regularly get tetanus shots because you come across it in the soil quite a bit, so she might not get tetanus at least.
She's dead, but she doesn't have tetanus.
Nope, she has
silver lining.
She has sepsis among probably 18 other things.
Yeah.
It's funny because they make such a big deal of her like first aid training and in the game when she saves Roth's leg and stuff, and she knows how.
Yeah, they have an actual doctor in the game too, though, as well. So like, it's not all her, but
no, but like she has that training, and they make such a big deal out of it, and I'm like, yeah. So why do they make the first injury that she gets in this game so unrealistically disabling? A real person getting stuck all the way through the torso with a metal spike and then pulling it out, and just like letting themselves bleed.
Nope. Yeah, we're dead.
To kind of bring it back actually to the movie, I want to talk, speaking of the, like, in the game, she has this like team of people who kind of all serve various functions and functionaries for the plot and the mechanics and all that kind of stuff. Whereas in the movie, that all gets kind of simplified into both her father character and Lou Ren. Is that his name?
Yep.
That was his dad's name. Yeah, Lou Ren.
They're both named Lou Ren.
Okay.
That was a joke in the, like, she's looking for Lou Ren, she finds him, and it's not the Lou Ren she means.
Yeah. So played by Daniel Wu, where his role, he also like felt he became kind of perfunctory and superfluous to the plot about halfway through as well.
Yeah.
Because he's there to get her.
A great acting job, by the way.
He was great.
Like, he was
maybe my favorite
he was
part.
the standout actor in that movie. But
well, he had jokes, which was him and Nick Frost were the only ones bringing any of that to the table.
Yeah.
But boy, he did not have a lot to work with.
Yeah, because there's this like sort of weird B plot kind of that's really dangling there about him saving, because they have all these, I guess, like Chinese fishermen and shipwreck survivors that they've been like gang pressed into doing all the grunt work on this archaeological dig, and he saves them.
Which they're using dynamite.
Yes,
tried and true tradition of archaeology.
Yeah,
true,
right.
Truly. I mean, when you're an evil corporation that expects results above all else, like,
I suppose that's true.
was their plan? Were they just like also were they just dynamiting the whole island willy nilly?
Pretty
And how much
much.
dynamite did they bring with them?
Seems like it.
They
They
did.
didn't
I
know
mean,
where the tomb was, so and
they have
it's
a
not like
helicopter. Bring supplies. You could have
it's
never-ending
not
supplies.
apparently they didn't have lidar or any of the ground systems that we would use as archaeologists.
To make life easier.
And he said he had been there for 7 years with like
7
minimal to
years.
no contact with the outside world.
He said that he had no people to talk to, and that was really weird because like he
Yes.
said it multiple times, and then he has like this army of
Yeah.
dudes.
Well, that's just the corporate boss. He's got no one at his level. Like the grunts don't talk, and like God forbid you talk to any of the workers. People we're talking about. Let's be real here, guys.
So awful.
Yeah, it made it seem like he was living on the island alone when he's got like an army working for him. But.
Yeah,
I really genuinely was surprised when he said that he'd been out there alone for 7 years, and then it's like, no, he has an army. I thought they were just going to do away with the army.
That would be like almost more interesting if it was just like Walter Goggins with his little like pickaxe, just like going into the mountain alone for 7 years. I like
That could have been interesting, right?
I think
Like
yeah.
if like he had been, I don't know, instead of some corporate blowhard, if he had been the dad's assistant and had screwed him over,
Yes.
and like now Laura shows up with new information and he's like, which would also make it a lot more likely that Mr. Croft, whatever his name was, would actually be able to survive all that time
Yeah.
on the island without being detected.
Right.
yeah.
To make a weird connection, because it's like, well, he should be like John Voight in Anaconda, where in the Anaconda movie, John Voight, aka Laura Croft's dad, both in the movie and in real life, is just like this like kind of crazy snake hunter out in the jungle that they find, and then they bring him on board and then come to regret it. But yeah, he could have been a John Voight in God, never. It's a dark day when you look to Anaconda for like a guy. As
no, right. Well, I was gonna say like Ben Gunn in Treasure Island, which
yes,
is similar.
Yeah.
If he was evil.
If he was evil.
That brings me to like another major change we have from game to movie is that like the antagonist in the movie is this Trinity Corporation, and Matthias Vogel is the face of it. I had to say Vogel because I'm like, I giggle because it's so close to my last name. And so I'm like, oh no, I'm evil now. And Christie's got mentioned too for sold antiquities. So like, maybe I was made for this movie. But the major change is like, well, actually, in the video game, you're going up against a cult that has been built up from all these shipwrecked individuals over the years and decades.
The leader, Matthias, is genuinely frightening. He's not some bored, misogynistic racist on an island. He's a genuinely frightening human being who believes with all of his soul that in order to persevere and build his life back, he has to indoctrinate an army of cult followers and reincarnate the Queen Himiko. And like that
that's
is
cool.
like one of the only two ways off the island in the end. There are only two things that could do it. There's either his way or Lara's way.
Yeah.
Which is destroying Himiko instead of resurrecting her.
Yeah, that sounds like more fun.
And you also lose one of the things as I recalled about the game is that you have this character Sam, who is, in addition to Laura Croft's girlfriend, she is a descendant of the original inhabitants of the island and is there as part of like an anthropological sort of project.
Yeah, like there's this connection from the very beginning because Sam is specifically, her family legend is that they are descended from Himiko. And so it makes sense when she is sort of the chosen one to become the new vessel for Himiko. And like it sets it up very well because the first time you meet Matthias before you know that he's a bad guy is when you find him and Sam at a campfire and he's rescued Sam from the shipwreck. and is like treating her well and acting kind of avuncular, and would totally, if there hadn't been resistance, would totally have just said, "Okay, come with me," and ta-da, new Himiko. He doesn't actually care at all about the rest of what happens, but everybody has to serve and obey him. And you hear this actually if you listen to the various mooks as you're playing the game. They have conversations, like people from of different durations on the island, people who have different relationships to Matthias or relationships within the organization, because there's like a group of Russians that crash landed there that are, I mean, they don't say that they're like spetsnaz or whatever, but you know, like you get this, they're the crazy ones who will absolutely screw your shit up. And then you have to fight one of them who is in fact quite a beast. But
And the island itself has this like built up, like it's, I mean, it's a thing you've seen elsewhere, but it's like people have been crash landing on this island for centuries, because you've got Japanese, you've got Portuguese, you've got US Marines, you've got stuff from World War II, et cetera, et cetera. And then it kind of builds up this like layers of mythology on the island. And also because there's actual curse on the island, nobody can ever leave.
right, and as you go through the game, you see these different layers of the history of the island being built up, and writing and artifacts from different periods on the island. There's even a point at which you can find an artifact that's from an earlier point in history, a Chinese artifact from like several hundred years before the tale of Himiko. And Lara says, like internally, like, I wonder if the Chinese landed on this island before it became Yamatai, although
Yeah.
that's not a conclusion you could actually draw just from finding that pot. But, you know,
Mhm.
I have a lot to say about the archaeology in the game. Less so about the archaeology in the movie, because they kind of didn't.
Not really any.
Yeah, it's just in the last scene where they go into the tomb and do a sort of poor man's version of Raiders and
Which, like,
solve a color puzzle.
are we calling that archaeology? Like,
It is tomb raiding.
It is tomb raiding.
Well,
It is
Give
that.
it that.
I'm working through a really bad joke. Just give me a second to like form it.
Okay, I can't wait. I can't wait.
They should call it Tomb Blowers Upper, because that's really what they do. They find a tomb and then they just blow that shit right up.
That they
So
do.
much
That was really
dynamite.
bad, Colin. Thank you.
So
They just-
much dynamite.
Yeah, it was the runway to get to that punchline was really worth the effort it took. Yeah, he just C4s Himiko's tomb, but
Yeah, the irony ends up being that, as Julie did a wonderful job of explaining, it's like there's some really cool archaeology actually happening in the video game, even though it's got this huge supernatural element to it. And like when both of them end up being removed from the film.
Right.
And so you lose any kind of fun and or realistic aspect of it.
You know, the painting style that they show in the movie, and they don't give time periods in the movie.
Mm-mm.
So, but it's like it's almost like Edo period, which is much more modern.
Yeah.
It's like
Mhm.
basically pre-modern.
Mhm.
Well, they do the thing that I love in movies where they like are explaining some myth, and then someone has clearly like hunted through a bunch of different like woodcut prints or like
Mhm.
ink drawings, and you get these like amalgamations of like different art from like different periods that are like there in the background as they're talking about whatever it is.
Yeah. Whereas in the game, like I said, I'm not going to call the game's archaeology like actually good, because the style that they use for the Himiko era buildings and statuary is actually very Buddhist, which is about 600 years after the story of Himiko. And they do talk about timeline in the game a little bit, and that doesn't match. But they do it very consistently. They have a very specialized look for how Himiko's tomb works, how the monastery looks, how the village around it looks. That is very traditional Japanese, and that couldn't just be in California, like Colin was saying. Like, this
Mhm.
island is very clearly in the Sea of Japan. Like, it's around there. It has all the hallmarks. It has the vegetation. It has the landscape.
Like I said, I was very surprised to learn this movie was filmed in South Africa. I would not have landed on
Yeah,
that
it
conclusion.
looked like it could have been anywhere.
Yeah. What I do like though, again with both the films and the video games, because we talked about how the first movies make kind of that joke when like Laura has to pick her next adventure. She's like Egypt. She's like, nah, let's not do Egypt. And you do get exposed to these different locations that also have a long, rich archaeological past. And that was also something I really liked about the franchise as a whole, because you're not just going to Egypt, or Mesoamerica is still a really popular one. Lord knows we talk about Rome all the time. So.
I know.
We
right?
we could create in this podcast, as we were going through all these like film archaeology or archaeology on film things, like we could create the hierarchy of like where's your archaeologist adventurer going, like in likelihood in descending order, like Egypt, Incan,
Yep.
ancient China, maybe,
The
Greece and
The
Rome.
Mummy 3 went to China.
I feel like there's like a natural progression you work through when you're like and it's like a scalular thing where it's like like Egypt is like, you know, the starting point always, and then from there the next order places to go are like South America, maybe East Asia.
Which is really, like you were saying, Christy, a very pleasant thing about this franchise is both the original franchise, both the games and the movies, all of them kind of, I mean, like you do get some Egypt, I think at the end of one of the movies, but
the beginning scene, she's in a training room made up to look like an Egyptian temple.
She's
to
not
fight
actually in Egypt.
Right.
Yeah, and it's to fight a robot.
But they very much, they're like the second movie is set in Africa. I mean, I don't know where. I don't know where in Africa.
Neither do they.
Go to Kilimanjaro, I think, at one point. But.
Yeah, like it's somewhere in probably close to like middle of Africa, not in the desert, but maybe in the savannah. And like not in a city. It's just it's out there.
Yeah.
And you actually see trees that are identifiably African native trees and African native wildlife. I would never have guessed that the 2018 movie was filmed in Africa anywhere. I genuinely thought that was just like shot in, I don't know, New Mexico or something.
Yeah. So another big question I had watching this is that like all of the Lara Croft stuff really had, along with the supernatural theme, it's also this idea of, at least in the movies, like her dad is looking up all the stuff about Himiko for kind of a solution to the death of his wife and Lara's mother. And there's also like the fact that there is a big emphasis on figures that we want to basically find those individuals, and the supernatural element makes them alive, right? Like not in a good way, more of a zombie ghost way. But I was kind of thinking, like, as archaeologists, I would argue, I don't know, Elijah, is your sense that archaeologists are superstitious when it comes to supernatural stuff? No, you did leave an offering in the closet.
Very.
Okay, that is because we were the only people there. And it's scary when it's dark. Maybe that makes me superstitious. I don't know. I think I'm just a human who gets scared by weird noises in the middle of the night in the middle of the country.
You stayed in that cabin by yourself one time too.
I did, and I have never been so convinced that a place is haunted in my entire life. Which I'm not really making my case.
You're not making a good case anymore.
Okay, but
so tell us some more about how you're not superstitious.
I didn't dig up any of the graves at Ganji Vecchio. I have looked at the bones, but I didn't unearth any of those things. And I think it's more about being alone, and your human brain can, make up a lot of things about why there are weird noises outside in the woods. And that's just normal.
I have to agree. Like being professionally adjacent to lots of archaeologists, they are some of the least superstitious people I know in a lot of ways. And I don't mean that in the like they won't knock on wood for luck. They won't, leave an offering to Athena if it seems like a funny thing to do. Of course, many of them will.
Yes.
But like in terms of actual, like when it comes to the dig,
yes,
respect, yes. Believe in the supernatural, not even a little.
No. At Histria, I took about 18 bodies out of a massive tomb, I felt, just perfectly fine about all of that. Very, very respectful, and the need to be sort of kind of a guardian of, the fact that we have disturbed this, which is a huge part of ethics and especially anthropology. But I also remember I had like baskets of infant burials under my bed for a while because we had very little storage, and I slept just fine.
The number of times that Lige have had to sleep in the same room as human remains, it's not a lot, but it's more than anyone normal would probably have to go through.
Yeah, that seems about right.
I'm just reminded, I've gone down a rabbit hole. I'm reminded of any Onion articles you ever read about archaeologists. I always like archaeologists tired of unearthing unspeakable evils, or archaeologists uncover ancient race of skeletons.
Yes, it's so good.
Yeah, I think I agree with Lige, is that things that might come off as superstitious is really like actually a heightened sense of respect for the dead. In terms of, like, I remember one time there had been remains that had been relocated, and whoever stored them, like, literally put them at the bottom of a stack of bricks that we collected from the site. And like when I took her out, and like was like I was almost in tears, just like the amount of damage I had seen. And I had did you have the same visceral reaction when Laura has to crawl into one of the cubbies that has the handmaiden?
Yeah, it was like, oh no, she's disturbing the tomb.
Yeah, I was like, she moves and goes crunch, and you're like, no,
please don't.
She falls through like 30 of them.
I know.
Yeah. I also was like, well, I guess they didn't catch the disease. Good for them.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was really funny to me that all of the handmaidens were skeletons and Himiko was a mummy.
Yeah.
Like, why did you go to such lengths to preserve someone who's a disease vector for this weird zombie fungus disease?
It interestingly enough, like that could have been an unintentional result of like just the environment and having an enclosed space, like because she was in a sarcophagus, so like like the minute they released it, she did deteriorate.
That's true.
Quickly,
really quickly.
So it's like there is weird stuff with human remains that happens like that. Like the mummies on top of the Andes Mountains, that is just a result of the dry, arid air that is there. That's not really the result of anything intentionally done by other human beings. So
that's true.
Yeah, and deep in this cave, you wouldn't necessarily expect that to happen. So that totally makes sense if they somehow made the tomb airtight. It was also really interesting because they made such a point of how viscerally unpleasant it was when Matthias was messing with her, when he had like his goons touch her. Speaking of actors who deserved better, Matthias's two head goons are like professional stage actors, and they were just really expressive, even though they had like 2 lines apiece.
Yeah,
like the black guy was like,
what happened to the floor guy? Yeah.
He had like 1 line, and it was so good.
When you get just like, when you only got a tiny bit of, you got to make every syllable count, right?
Yeah.
Rest in peace, hench goons.
R.I.P. hench goons.
They also have the internal problem, like, where do these people find these goons? Like, do you go on Craigslist? Like, where do these people, all these like goons for hire, where do they come?
Mercenaries.
The henching union?
Like in Venture Brothers or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
I was gonna say, if you're gonna try and pull that off in the US, like you want to dig up a cursed Civil War site, you just get the local group of people who like to dress up and do reenactments.
The local reenactors and archaeology enthusiasts.
There you go.
The amateurs.
There's your goons. You got your goons.
Metal detectors.
But they will probably not kill anyone for you. Just saying.
Yeah.
I think maybe like I almost feel like you mentioned the Walton Goggins complaining about he has nobody to talk to. I hope like one of the goons was just outside his tent this whole time, just like tears in his eyes, just like, come on, man.
We had a moment.
Is that what you think of it? Do I mean so little to you?
Did that night mean nothing?
Truly.
I mean, they've been there 7 years,
Right?
you know.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
So I guess like my question is, because we haven't explored this as much, like we've talked about with Indiana Jones, where some of the supernatural element is tied into the more problematic aspects of pseudo archaeology, but like so much does have this supernatural element to it that like why do you all think that is promoted for the most part in video games and movies about archaeology, and the interesting choice to actually remove that from this movie, because that was a big change up.
To answer your first question is because it's cool. Like when Julie was describing the situation with this like this like sorcerer's ghost and the cult springing up around it that worships her with an intense fever. I'm like, that's interesting and like fun. And that's a cool idea. And I think maybe I might be the lone person in the room that doesn't like the rationalizing twist, because I always find twists to rationalize unexplained and paranormal phenomenon to be kind of unsatisfying and like I kind of a cheap out in a lot of ways, like a sort of a cheap ticket out that has been done. Like in some ways, like, you know, and there is bad situations of it, but it does feel like kind of I don't know, like it feels like it's being clever and it thinks it's being clever, but it's like not actually that clever. It feels like it thinks it's being clever, and it's like, I don't know, like a ghost spirit is almost more interesting that we have to appease.
I see where you're coming from with that. And I do agree that like the supernatural aspect is just cool. And I think it's part of why archaeology has that sort of like mysticism surrounding it, is because we kind of want to believe that there is this connection in our past to something that we don't fully understand, that is not scientific. It is a little bit more in the realm of magic, I guess. And I think maybe that people who go into archaeology, who stay in archaeology, like, you know, actually like the real stuff. Like we think that the real stuff is really magical. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that is not supernatural, but is still an incredible discovery and is still really, really awesome. And so I think that's maybe why I like the realistic part, because
this
I think
might be admittedly like a disciplinary distinction between me and the rest of the group, where I will, if given the choice between an interesting but completely bullshit story over a real but boring truth, I will take the interesting bullshit story 99 out of 100 times.
Which I
You
love
and
that
most
for
of
you, Colin.
humanity.
Yeah.
So that's actually a thing that I was thinking about. Is this is the same reason that people gravitate towards conspiracy theories. It's not because conspiracies don't exist. It's because the ones that do exist, that are real, are so boring and so obvious. It's always the old rich white guy.
Yep.
It just always is. It's always not that guy, that dictator is just a dictator doing dictator stuff. It's never, oh, he's playing 4D chess with the deep state. Like, no, that's way more interesting, but it's never true. And that's, I think, the same thing, right? It's the sense of interest and wonder that we want to feel towards any mystery. Like, what's out in space? Let's come up with, you know, wacky alien adventures. What's under the sea? Maybe it's the abyss, you know, maybe it's monsters, maybe it's Atlantis. You know, what is in the past is the same question. And I think that's why pseudo archaeology exists, right? Is because we want it to be more interesting than humans have always been humans.
Yep.
And have always done human things. Sorry, I'm with you, Elijah. I just really think that's cool. I think it's really neat that humans have always been humans, and that we can look at a Neolithic grave and see signs of mourning the dead and repaired wounds and caring and love. Like, that's so human.
Kind of, if I could, like, just to add on to that, like there is a thing with conspiracy theories where it actually kind of like, it's in some ways like an overcorrection of like a rationalizing, where it actually seeks like what it tries to do, it imposes a kind of rationalistic viewpoint and comes up with elaborate sort of proofs and theorems of like why these people are actually lizards, or aliens or why there's it's like complicated and it follows a kind of like internal logic, which is like a sort of fallacy in like the way it like imposes meaning and it sees rationality where there like is none. But then sort of to the point of like my preference to an exciting story is like a thing that bugs me, and this mostly comes from like teaching many courses about like mythology and literature, is the tendency to always want to kind of rationalize stories that are sort of taken, like that's not how like myth or storytelling or belief or something like that kind of works in reality, where it's not always just some like actual rational explanation of like, oh, it was disease or it was a this or that and that's why we have this story. And there's always some kind of like, because in that way that kind of to me like reduces a thing into just some like just some kind of
normal everyday
logicized explanation where it misses the kind of like the the wonder or the function that's sort of so important.
But imagine for a second that instead of this blah Tomb Raider adaptation, instead of that movie, imagine we got the movie of Himiko in this version, the movie where suddenly she's got the Midas touch. Everyone she loves turns into these black fungus zombies and then dies. And she's trying to figure out what to do. And she has this grand, tragic ending of suicide in an airless tomb inside a mountain full of traps that they build around her. Like, that's a grand story.
Yeah.
We don't have to go to the supernatural to be interesting.
But we don't get that story here.
The disease that they have is not particularly realistic.
Well,
I mean, that might as well be magic in its own way.
Magic begins where science ends.
Exactly. So like it doesn't have to kill the interest to just have been a guy in a suit all along. It's all in how you pull it off. And I think the problem with this movie is that it had that ambition with nothing to back it up.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah.
I love that both sides of this conversation, and I think because I really appreciate the like want and need for all of this wonder, and like not everything has to be explained, right? Like it's okay if maybe we don't understand everything. And I also but then really think the humanity of things and the awesome things that humans can do is also really spectacular. So I really love both sides of this conversation, you guys.
Yeah. Well, and I think it speaks to the struggle that we have as scholars with pseudo archaeology, but also with people with an interest in archaeology that ends up veering into pseudo archaeology.
Sure.
Because same as conspiracy theories, and I think Colin, like this idea of like you end up over rationalizing it. It's like people do some crazy research sort of things. They go and look for the evidence that fits their narrative, right? But they still put in hours and time and build communities around that.
Yeah.
Which is the same thing we do in archaeology and other fields where, it's a different kind of rationalization based on the scientific method. And, I kind of just think it's like all of these people who are obsessed with pseudo archaeology and Graham Hancock and stuff have not spent a horrible day in 90-degree weather sifting dirt.
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, neither have I.
That's but like I think that's the frustration is like neither side necessarily recognizes like how much effort is being put into the conclusions they're drawing. But we would all argue in Western society that rationalization follows the scientific method. Even people who are going into conspiracies would probably make that claim that they are using this method of discovering evidence and applying it to their theory and things, but it's just not actually following the process.
So like the real, to come back to like why we need, I was going to say about why we need the magic in the archaeology stories, and also to this sort of question, I think it all really goes back to like the Victorian era. And like simultaneous with the dawn of modern archaeology, you also have a massive increase in interest in the occult, spiritualism and the occult and mysticism and things like that. And the two kind of go hand in hand, right? When each of them is operating at just the right sort of ratio of like ignorance and knowledge, then it's like this perfect cocktail to create obsessions with finding the Ark of the Covenant or whatever it is.
Right. Yeah. And you have archaeologists in that time period building pseudo archaeology as anything from con artistry to national myth making.
Yeah.
Heinrich Schliemann, my least favorite
Mm-hmm.
person ever, going in and dynamiting Troy. Maybe that's where they got it.
Probably.
Just because he just wanted a skirt full of gold. That's what he wanted.
Mm-hmm.
He
Mhm.
wanted gold. He wanted fame. He didn't care about the archaeology. He wanted the headlines.
But he also wanted to prove the Iliad was true because for some reason, all of a sudden, Western Europe was like, nah, it's just a story.
At the same time, you have Sir Arthur Evans going down to Knossos to try and prove that peaceful empires could exist.
Mhm.
And that, Victoria had inherited this mantle of being the peaceful empress. And so he destroyed archaeological evidence around Knossos and made a theme park out of it.
Yep.
And a very fun theme park.
Yeah,
Yeah,
very pretty one.
It's very good. I don't know if I'll ever have the stomach to go back, but it's definitely an attractive idea.
Yeah.
Sure.
But I was to come back to that Graham Hancock thing. There was just the debate with Flint Dibble. Bless Flint Dibble for that.
I want someone to give me the TLDR because I don't want to watch. Oh yeah, please.
First of all, Flint has some TLDRs on his YouTube channel.
Does.
And basically, what the debate was came down to Flint saying, okay, we have this evidence, this evidence, this evidence, this evidence, this evidence for the traditional view of prehistory. What is your evidence for there being an advanced civilization? And having Graham Hancock admit out loud that there was none.
Mm-hmm.
That he was arguing from an absence.
Yes.
And that's kind of the thing, right? Is archaeology as a field is about analyzing the evidence that does exist and acknowledging the places where we don't have it. And that isn't really understood widely, I think. That's why it still feels so mysterious to so many people. And just to veer off into another area of my life, we were just having this big media literacy conversation over in the YouTube media analysis space, and YouTuber Zoe B just put out a video essay on what is media literacy and what do we actually want from it. And basically the big point in it was that people think having an opinion equals analyzing the movie or whatever. But that's not it. Not all opinions are valid. I mean, you can have whatever opinion you want. You can have your headcanon.
Mm-hmm.
But in order to actually analyze media, you have to work from the evidence that exists, not the evidence you want to exist.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the distinction we're trying to make here is like, you can have whatever crackpot theory you want as long as you acknowledge it's just yours. But when you veer into pseudoarchaeology, when you veer into conspiracy theory, what's happening is that you aren't looking at what evidence actually exists. You're looking for what fits your narrative.
Yeah. One of the things that, like, a fundamental aspect of most conspiracy theories is it shifts the burden of proof, where it's like, it's up to you to disprove me. Whereas, like, in a sort of scientific process, right? The one who the burden of proof is on the one making the claim. If I'm going to claim something happened or didn't happen, I need to have positive evidence to suggest X, Y, and Z. I can't say just because you can't say it didn't happen. And that's where most conspiracy theories, like, that's where they kind of live, is like they live in the ambiguity of like, well, you can't disprove me.
Right, which is why the giant flying spaghetti monster exists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sure. Well, and I was just thinking to the Colin's earlier point of like that both archaeology as a field and spiritualism really came out around the same time. And it's like one of the oldest archaeology jokes beyond archaeologists will date any old thing is when in doubt, it's ritual. Right?
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Ritual significance.
Yes.
What's this object? It's definitely not a dildo. Must be a ritual object.
Exactly. It's either a dildo or it's ritual.
Yes.
Well, it's both, I would argue. But.
And that was like this weird reluctance that did exist in the field of just saying we don't know based on the evidence we currently have, because that wasn't a satisfying enough answer at the time. And I think we've gotten better as archaeologists saying we don't know. Here are some possible ideas, but we can't conclusively say that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it might be ritual. Because Lige and I have definitely done that. I'm like,
Yeah, we've
here's
done
all
that.
this
We wrote that
pile of
paper.
strange sheep bones. Might
I
be
mean, I like
ritual. Who knows?
I mean, this is, I mean, because well, it's also like the ritual thing kind of has the benefit of sort of always being right. Where like right now, if my apartment were to be, buried in a mudslide or something like that, there'd be a lot of evidence to suggest that I spent a lot of time in front of this computer and a lot of time in front of my TV and various other places. And like, it is ritual significance to an extent, right? I do go and like, fire up Zelda like, nightly. And am I worshiping
Likely
it?
what I'm doing after this.
Yeah, right. Like, I mean, because ritual is like, my bathroom sink is a ritual altar that I worship at every night when I brush my teeth.
Oh,
Yeah.
I like
For some definitions of worship.
Yes, this is which I will
Well,
defer to the rest of you on.
well, and I think like overall, because there's very few movies that are just archaeology is archaeology. The one we've seen, well, technically two, Lost City, but that was really
Oh,
a spoof of it.
I don't know
But
about
really,
that.
it was The Dig. It was the first episode
Yeah.
I ever came on to talk about, and like it's interesting, but it's like it's never going to be an action like action adventure like most of these archaeology films. It's going to be a drama where the big bad is the British Museum at the end of the day.
And the
Well,
Nazis.
And the Nazis.
And the Nazis. I love how they
I mean,
still
not
were the
false
big bad.
in either case.
No.
Yeah.
True. Yeah.
And yeah, so it's like, can we create more movies about archaeologists that are going to interest people and show them like what the field is really like, or are we I just don't think we'll ever be able to get away from the supernatural action adventure that it
So,
is.
to sort of counter that point obliquely, perhaps,
Mhm.
I want to come back to the video game space because actually one of my absolute favorite video games of all time. Sorry, I wanted to say The Dig because that's also true, but has very little to do with archaeology. But one of my favorite games is Heaven's Vault, and the main mechanic of that game is epigraphy.
Nice.
Ooh.
You are an archaeologist translating an ancient language that nobody really knows anymore. You're like the expert, the best that there is, and you know crap. And it is a genuinely awe-inspiring experience that you play as an archaeologist. Maybe not the most ethical archaeologist ever found, but this is a different world and it's in space. So okay, we're a little removed. But it does a really good job of showcasing actual archaeological skills, the kind of places you might find archaeological items, the kind of conclusions you can draw from objects, and how the more of a type or a location you have, the more conclusions you can make. And there's just all of this real archaeology in there, partially because the creator, John Ingold, was the son of another famous archaeologist. We have actual archaeological gameplay coming in and being well received and winning awards, and it's not the only one of its kind, but like there are starting to be more games that do that. And I think once there's more media that does that in general, then we will start to see archaeology as a normal profession instead of Indiana Jones Tomb Raider.
Mhm.
It doesn't belong in a museum, folks. It belongs repatriated and well cared for in its home.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Well, if no one else, does anyone have any final thoughts, final questions? Because I had like one prediction question going forward, but
Please, please, please,
I'm
please.
good.
okay. So the next Lara Croft iteration is not far out. It's coming out October on Netflix. We're getting Lara Croft the animated series, which is also looks like it's more based off the rebooted version of Lara Croft. So what do you guys think? Are they going to go more of the route of the game? Are they going to go more the route of the movie? What are you hoping to see from that? Because we'll get to cover that here soon as well.
So I believe that they're going to choose to go more the route of the game based on the success of the game, and also if they're making a series out of it, there's more material there. But I think we'll see elements
Yeah.
from probably from all iterations crop up. And hopefully, actually one prediction that I've heard that is a way out there prediction, I don't know, is that they'll go kind of Carmen Sandiego on it, and make it about repatriation.
Oh, okay.
I did like the Carmen Sandiego that Netflix did. I did watch that series. So yeah, that's
it
a really
sounded
cool
real
idea.
cute. I haven't seen more than an episode, but it's real cute.
Yeah.
I was just looking up to see if it had like a rating, and it's TV 14. So I'm wondering if it's not going to go quite as gore heavy as the.
Probably not.
I don't think anything is going to go that gore heavy again.
But you know what? It is Powerhouse Animation, and Blood of Zeus has.
That's true.
Yeah, Castlevania.
Yeah.
Oh, very true.
Both of which can get pretty
true.
Okay, that's true. Those two shows are really bloody.
And when it's animated, you get a little more leeway, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
Fair enough.
Mhm.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm very intrigued. We'll see.
Now I'm just thinking about Blood of Zeus again.
No, I'm trying to just think of something that's completely off the wall and wrong to say.
Colin lives for that.
Yeah. I need chaos.
We've established that Colin wants the conspiracy theory version.
That is true.
Yeah, I don't even care what I want. I just want the thing that's going to cause the most trouble.
I want Lara Croft turned superhero supervillain in Marvel Universe because
I don't want something.
I forget which game it's from, but I want Lara Croft to straight up fight a dinosaur because she does do that at one point.
Do not confuse people with paleontology and archaeology.
I don't think that will ever. I don't think that
will ever change.
She's not digging the dinosaur. I think the dinosaur is in the tomb that she's raiding.
Yeah, it's true. I do remember her fighting a dinosaur at one point.
That doesn't help.
No, it doesn't.
I'm really looking forward to that.
All right. Julie, thank you so much for joining us today. It was really fun having both a gaming expert and a classical world expert and an East Asian studies expert to help unpack this particular iteration of Lara Croft. If our audience wants to learn more about you, check out some of your other archeo gaming stuff, where can they find you?
So my name is Julie Levy. I am the managing director of the Save Ancient Studies Alliance. They do a live archeo gaming session almost every Friday in the mid-afternoon, so you can check them out at Save Ancient Studies on YouTube and Twitch, and also check out their webpage. We have so many events. Y'all, there's a lot of cool stuff going on. If you are at all interested in the ancient world, please check out the Save Ancient Studies Alliance. You will like it, I promise. But as for me personally, I also have my YouTube persona, Zilla Black, and I run a YouTube channel called Zilla's Athenaeum. You can find me there. I also have a Twitch where I do archeo gaming most every Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern. And you can find me there under @Zillable. That's syllable, but with a Z. And that's also my handle if you want to find me on Blue Sky or Mastodon.
And then finally, special thanks to all you listeners. We could not produce episodes like this without your support. That being said, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe if you like what you hear. You can find all our episodes at movieswedig.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to know more about our upcoming plans and episode releases, be sure to follow us on social media, where you can find us under the handle @DigMovies or some variation of @MoviesWeDig on most platforms. Next time, we'll be checking out the latest iteration of Lara Croft from the upcoming Netflix animated show. Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.